You're listening to episode 22 of the Fed and Fearless podcast. On today's episode, I'm going to share with you the 12 signs that you may be undereating. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Laura Schoenfeld. I'm a registered dietitian and coach trained in functional medicine with a passion for helping women just like you ditch perfectionism and use food, fitness, and self-care to fuel your bigger God-given purpose. I believe that it's possible to achieve your biggest life-changing goals without the frustration, obsession, or negative self-talk that so many women subject themselves to every day. All you need are the right tools, the right mindset, and the faith to turn your dreams into reality. I'm here to guide you along the way. The truth is that you are so much more than a body, and I'm on a mission to help you change the way you think and act at a core beliefs level so you can transform your physical, mental, and spiritual health from the inside out. Are you ready to become fed and fearless in your pursuit of a healthy, meaningful life? Welcome to the Fed and Fearless podcast. Hey there, welcome back to the Fed and Fearless podcast. I'm Laura Schoenfeld, I'm your host as always, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic that is very near and dear to my heart because so many women that I work with on a day-to-day basis struggle with this exact issue. And honestly, pretty much all of the men that I work with, which is not too many, but I do have a couple of male clients, typically, this is something that they're struggling with as well. And it's something that I don't think gets a lot of attention in the world of health and is something that can create so many health problems that just go undetected or undealt with for a long time until this issue is resolved. And this issue is undereating. Now, many women and some men have a warped perspective of what enough food really is. And this perspective can come from a variety of different sources. This can come from reading fitness magazines that recommend a 1,200 calorie a day meal plan. Or maybe you have a trainer that promotes both a low carb and a low fat diet for fat loss. There's so many different reasons why women can get misled into eating far less food than they actually need to support their optimal health, and they don't even realize it. Now, the fact is, when you don't eat enough, your body reduces active thyroid hormone, shuts down your sex hormone production, and raises adrenal stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. And it's primarily these hormonal changes that lead to the 12 different signs of undereating that I'm going to share with you in this episode. Now, cortisol is a really important hormone, and if you're not familiar with it, it's one of our body's main stress hormones that's produced by the adrenals to help deal with things like inflammation, blood sugar control, and even things like our sleep and wake cycles. However, chronically elevated cortisol can lead to things like leptin and insulin resistance, which are an unhealthy hormonal state that not only promotes body fat and water retention, but it can also cause long-term health issues that affect our entire bodies. Now, you may be wondering, why is undereating so much more common than women realize? The truth is that as humans, social cues direct so much of our food intake. And I'm sure you've been in a situation before where the decision to eat or not eat or how much you were eating was at least somewhat, if not fully, influenced by what other people were eating around you. Now, the sad part about this is that men are typically applauded for eating a lot of food, but it's a totally different experience for women. Have you ever been eating out with friends and felt uncomfortable about how much you were eating compared to the other women? I know I've definitely been there before, and it's not just because of social cues. Sometimes I've even been in situations where women were commenting on the amount of food I was eating. Now, luckily for me, I'm at a place where I really don't care what other people think about what I'm eating. And if somebody were to make that comment to me at this point, I would not let that impact my food choices whatsoever, but I can definitely understand why that would be something that was stressful, whether it's a friend of yours or your mom, someone making a comment about how much you're eating and suggesting that maybe you're eating too much can be really damaging to your perspective about what enough food is for you. And even if somebody doesn't say something, maybe there's some underlying beliefs that you have about what's appropriate for a woman to eat that affects the way that you eat in front of other people. As an example, have you ever been on a date before and you wanted to impress the person that you were on that date with? And one of the things you thought would be impressive is to eat in a more feminine and polite way. And again, these are just words that I'm using to describe the thought process that we have. I do not think that eating a small amount of food is inherently feminine, but it is something that I think drives a lot of our food choices as women. And I know I've definitely been there before where I was on a date with someone and I didn't want to necessarily be eating a huge amount of food in front of someone that I just met. So if you've been there before, I'm sure you can understand what it feels like to change how much you're eating in order to feel more comfortable around someone, even if they didn't even say anything about how much you were eating. So the truth is that our social environments can set up women for chronic undereating. And this is especially true for those women who are highly active, but still have this belief that they should be eating as much or rather as little as their active or sedentary friends. Again, I've been in this situation before where I am a pretty active person and maybe I was eating out with a group of friends and I had already worked out that day and knew I needed to eat a lot more to replenish my calorie needs. And I would be lying if I said that sometimes I don't have an initial sense of just awareness that I'm eating a significant amount more than the other women around me. So again, like I said, I've gotten to a mental space where that doesn't bother me anymore, but it is something that I've definitely noticed. And I know that a lot of my clients struggle with just comparing themselves or comparing their plate to their friends when their friends maybe aren't as active as they are. Or even if they are as active, maybe they're not making the healthiest choices for how much food they're eating, even though they actually need to eat more food. Now, another reason why undereating is so common, and it's something that I talk about all the time, is the influence of clean eating and restrictive diets on the total amount of food that we eat. So if you're following a specific dietary approach, such as paleo, keto, veganism, any of these specific restrictive diets that really have an emphasis on health and clean eating and following dietary rules, a lot of times this is something that can lead to chronic undereating of calories or maybe even certain macronutrients like protein, carbs, and fat. A lot of times simply due to the low calorie density of the foods that you might be choosing on those diets, but also some of those diets like veganism, since you eschew animal products, you're not going to necessarily get a lot of protein on that diet. And the same goes for keto, since you're really supposed to be avoiding carbs for the most part on a keto diet. It's very easy to undereat because you're minimizing how many carbs you're taking in. And in some cases, you're not getting enough carbs to support the lifestyle that you're living. So I work with a lot of people that have this issue where they've gone on one of these diets with the intention of improving their health. It's rare that somebody would go on this diet with the intention of not helping their health. They're pretty restrictive and they're pretty challenging to implement. And so you have to be pretty motivated to make a big dietary change like paleo, keto, vegan, vegetarianism, that kind of thing. And so when they make those changes, they believe that they are eating in a healthy way. And the foods themselves that they're choosing a lot of times are healthy foods in and of themselves. But again, because a lot of times they're focused on real food, whole foods, a lot of times very heavily plant-based, these foods are very low in calories compared to the amount of volume that they provide. And a lot of women don't understand that by making these dietary shifts, they're drastically cutting their calorie intake and ultimately creating a long-term calorie deficit that leads to undereating on a day-to-day basis. Now, even if you're not following a clean or restrictive diet like the ones that I mentioned a second ago, that doesn't mean that you're not at risk for undereating because there are so many different circumstances that can negatively affect our appetites. This includes things like stress, malnutrition, certain nutrient deficiencies can actually suppress our appetite, and even blood sugar dysregulation. So if you're having blood sugar swings, that is something that can affect how well you're able to follow your hunger signals and feel satiated in between meals. So, and stress is another one. I mentioned that a second ago, but I really want to point that one out because it's so important. Stress can make a huge impact on our appetites. I know even just speaking from my own personal experience, if I'm a little bit stressed, a lot of times I will be more prone to eating more food, or maybe more of those comfort foods that are easy to get a lot of calories from because they're typically a combination of carbs and fat, and they're usually delicious. So it's usually easy to eat more of them and maybe eat more calories than my body really needs on that day if I'm feeling a little bit stressed. But for me, if I'm very stressed, a lot of times that actually creates a suppression of my appetite, and I don't have the interest in eating the way that I would normally feel. And so if I'm not feeling that hunger, I'm not feeling super interested in food. I've been in situations before that I was stressed, especially like leading up to my wedding as an example. I was just too amped up all the time to really feel hungry, and I had to force myself to eat rather than desiring to eat. So stress is a huge factor when it comes to appetite regulation. And if you're somebody who, like me, will get a suppression of your appetite when you're under a higher amount of stress, then that is something that can easily lead to undereating. And you don't even necessarily realize it because you're not feeling hungry. And so you just have no idea that you're not getting enough calories during the day. So there's a lot of different things that can lead to undereating. We mentioned restrictive diets, stress, malnutrition, blood sugar dysregulation. There's many more than this. Digestive issues are another one that I see very commonly creating an undereating tendency. So if you're somebody that gets really bloated or gets full really fast when you're eating, or maybe you're feeling constipated a lot, that is something that can make it harder to eat enough because it makes sense. You just don't feel like you have enough space in your stomach for the amount of food you need to get the calories that you need to meet your day-to-day calorie needs. So digestive issues are another really common reason why people might be undereating. And it's one that I see very frequently, and one that can be a little bit trickier to deal with. Certainly not unmanageable, but it is one that requires a more functional medicine type approach where you're dealing with the gut issues while you're also working on increasing your food intake. And I hate to say it, but disordered eating tendencies, the desire to lose weight or control your body weight, is probably one of the most common reasons why a woman might be undereating. A lot of times those women are at least aware that they're choosing to undereat, or that they have this eat less, move more mindset. But still, it is pretty common that I see women who they think that if they were undereating, that they would be seeing weight loss. And if they're not losing weight, they make the assumption that I must be overeating, because if I was undereating, my weight would be going down. And I'm not going to get into this today because it's probably its own podcast episode, but I will say that undereating over the long term can actually create weight loss stalling because of the impact on thyroid health, metabolism, and how many calories your body is burning on a day-to-day basis. So don't let the lack of weight loss be something that indicates to you that you're not undereating, because I've worked with a lot of women who were undereating and their weight was either staying the same or even going up, which can sound very controversial and counterintuitive, but it is something that I've seen in practice working with clients. And eating more of the right types of foods at the right times of the day and supporting their activity levels was actually what really helped these women stop gaining weight, reverse their weight gain, and really see the positive body composition changes that they wanted to see, and was the original reason why they were undereating in the first place. So like I said, lots of different reasons why somebody might be undereating. But if you don't necessarily know if undereating is something that's an issue for you, I want to share 12 different common signs and symptoms that if you're experiencing one or more of these, that it could be an indicator that undereating is something that's contributing to poor health. And, one of these might be a little bit of a stretch, but when I read this list out, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, that's like all of those are me, or if you have like 3 or 4 of these on this list that you're like, yes, that's exactly how I feel, this is a really strong indicator that eating more is going to be really important as part of your health and healing process, and something that must be addressed as part of any sort of dietary plan that you're on. So I just wanted to point that out because, again, a lot of these symptoms can be a little vague and can apply to a variety of different health conditions. So this is not a diagnosis or anything like that. It's just indication that you might be dealing with undereating, and it's something that you at least want to check in on with a registered dietitian, with someone who's trained to look at this kind of stuff and to give you feedback about how much you're eating, whether it's enough for you, and if it's not, how to make changes in it. Okay, so I'm going to share with you the top 12 signs that I see every day working with clients and the ones that are the most common. This is not an exhaustive list. There might be some other signs and symptoms that I could add to this list. I'm sure it could get pretty long if I let it, but these are the ones that I see the most commonly and the ones that a lot of times are the first things to happen when you've been undereating for too long of a period of time. Okay, so the first sign that you're undereating is fatigue. And fatigue is, again, kind of a vague symptom. It's super common in our daily lives. Honestly, some fatigue is unavoidable in our modern society, especially if you have kids. I don't have kids yet, so this is me talking from vicarious experience with my friends and family, but I know that having children can disrupt your sleep, disrupt your schedule. So having a little bit of fatigue here and there is not something to necessarily freak out about. But you shouldn't feel like you need to have a nap to get through the day every day. You shouldn't feel like you are waking up in the morning and you can't even get out of bed. You shouldn't feel like you need 5 cups of coffee to focus on work throughout the day. So if you're feeling very tired, especially in the morning or in the afternoon, this is something that could be a sign that you are undereating, because calories are energy. And if you're not eating enough calories, you're not getting enough energy to fuel your body's needs on a day-to-day basis. And eventually your energy is going to suffer because you're literally not putting fuel in the tank. So fatigue is usually one of the first signs you're going to see if you are undereating. And the best way to check on that is to see if eating more makes you feel better or if it doesn't make any difference. Now, I want to give you a little caveat on that, something that I observed while working with a previous program I used to run called Paleo Rehab Adrenal Fatigue. If you've been a follower for several years, you'll know that that was a program that I offered with my colleague, Kelsey Kinney. We launched it in, I want to say it was 2014 or 2015. So it was definitely like 5 or 6 years ago that this program got created. But we had several hundred people go through that program. And something that we saw over and over was people that were dealing with chronic undereating occasionally, and frequently enough that it was notable, they would see that eating actually made them tired in the beginning. And my perspective on that is because if you are undereating on a regular basis, your stress hormones are going to be high, because stress hormones are important for keeping your blood sugar steady in the face of a calorie deficit. It promotes gluconeogenesis. So that's basically the breakdown of your body's protein stores to create glucose. And so it's normal to have high levels of stress hormones when you're chronically undereating. When you eating, and especially eating enough and eating a balance of protein, carbs, and fat, that lowers stress hormones. It does that for everybody. Eating is anti-stress. So it doesn't mean that you are, that you're somehow overly stressed if eating is a stress reliever for you. It's actually quite normal. But if you've been running on stress hormones and high levels of stress hormones every day because of a chronic underfed state, when you start eating more, that drop in stress hormones actually can create this almost pendulum swing of energy where you feel more tired initially. And the reason for that is because you're actually in a more restful state. That rest and digest kind of nervous system state is what's created. And if you've been on that higher level of stress hormones for a long time, the initial response when those stress hormones drop is going to be a sensation of extra fatigue. So it was very common for us to see that when people were going through our adrenal fatigue program, initially they might feel a lot more tired. The good news is they typically were sleeping better. They felt a little bit better. They weren't feeling quite as many symptoms overall, but a lot of them did have that initial drop in energy right off the bat because of the way that their bodies were almost, I don't want to say over relaxing. It was appropriate relaxation, but their bodies were so exhausted from running on stress hormones that as soon as they were given the opportunity to rest, they had that deep exhaustion. And they were able to eventually recover from that. But that is something to be aware of, that if undereating is creating a chronic stress response in your body, dropping those stress hormones by eating more is something that can initially make you feel more tired. So I just wanted to throw that little caveat in there, because if it's a little bit of under eating and you find that eating helps you feel more energetic, then that's a really good sign that under eating was creating your fatigue. But if you feel more tired after eating, don't let that stop you from experimenting with eating more, because it could actually be that initial extra fatigue that comes when your body really is taking advantage of that rest and digest type of nervous system activity. And you will get over that hump and start to feel better eventually, as long as you're continuing to eat enough. Okay, so the second sign that you may be under eating is constipation. You should be having a normal poop 1 to 2 times per day, every single day of your life. Now, obviously, there's going to be occasions here and there where maybe you have a little bit of constipation, maybe you got dehydrated or you're traveling, and a lot of people tend to experience a little bit of constipation when traveling. A little bit of that here and there is okay, but if you are finding yourself going multiple days without pooping, or really feeling like you're straining when you're trying to poop, or your bowel movements are like little rabbit pellets, essentially, those are signs that you are constipated, and anything less than a daily bowel movement is considered constipation. So if you're feeling constipated, there's a lot of different reasons that you might be. So again, this is not in and of itself a sign of undereating, but in the context of these other symptoms that I'm going to tell you about, this can be another sign that it's an issue. So there's a couple different reasons why undereating might lead to constipation. One is the impact on your thyroid health. I talked a little bit about that earlier in this episode, I'm sure I'll have a thyroid expert on, and we'll talk about thyroid health at some point down the road. But calories and adequate food intake is absolutely required for normal thyroid functioning, and constipation is a very common symptom of low thyroid hormone. So over time, undereating can lead to hypothyroidism, which can then trigger constipation. In a more immediate sense, constipation can be created simply from not having enough bulk to your stool. And I know this might sound super obvious, but food is what creates bulk. Now, also your gut bacteria are going to create bulk as well. So that is another piece of the puzzle. And that's why I'm saying constipation is not only a sign of undereating, but if you're simply just not getting enough total volume in your diet, you're not going to have anything to create a bowel movement with. So it's something that both you can experience that slowdown of thyroid activity and just a lack of food volume to create the stool that can create this constipation symptom. So if you are feeling constipated regularly and you don't have any other gut symptoms, or you've been tested and you don't have any issues with gut dysbiosis, this can be a sign of undereating. And honestly, for my clients, when I work with someone, even if we do think that digestive dysfunction or gut dysbiosis is an issue, that doesn't mean that we ignore the food intake. And pretty much every single person that I work with gets an analysis of their diet to make sure that they are eating enough. Because again, there's so many situations where undereating can trigger a worsening of these symptoms. And it can really become a vicious cycle, especially in gut issues, because basically you can develop these symptoms like bloating, early satiety, constipation from a dysbiosis issue. That means that you're not able to eat as much, or maybe your appetite is suppressed. You stop eating quite as much. And then that lack of eating affects your thyroid, which then creates more constipation, which then creates more bloating. And so it's just this vicious cycle that can really start to happen either from undereating in the beginning or from experiencing a gut dysbiosis issue that then leads to undereating. There's a lot of different reasons why this might come up. And like I said, if you are experiencing constipation, that can be a sign that you're undereating, and it's definitely something worth looking at. The third sign or symptom that you may be undereating is feeling cold all the time, especially if you feel like your hands and feet are constantly cold. Now, again, this may sound a little bit obvious, but if you don't have enough calories in your system from the food that you're eating, your body actually can't create adequate heat to warm yourself up. And that's because when our body burns calories for energy, a little bit of that energy is lost. It's not always captured to be used as true energy. A bunch of it is lost as heat. And so when we're burning calories, we're creating heat, and that's what raises our body temperature. Our thyroid and our thyroid hormones specifically do affect how many calories we're burning, and therefore affect how much heat is lost during that process and thus affects our body temperature. And that's why feeling cold and cold hands and feet is a lot of times a symptom of hypothyroidism. But again, if you're not even eating enough calories to burn enough to create that heat, that is something that can very quickly lead to a lower body temperature. Now, if you're questioning if your body temperature is an issue, obviously, if you're somebody who's cold all the time, that is something that you want to pay attention to. But you may not always be feeling cold. And so one thing that I always want my clients to be aware of is what's considered a healthy basal body temperature. A lot of the women that I work with do track their basal body temperature for fertility awareness and monitoring their menstrual cycle and seeing if they're ovulating. So if you're taking your basal body temperature either every day or once in a while, you want to make sure that that temperature is not dropping below 97 degrees Fahrenheit, because that is a warning sign of low metabolic rate, low thyroid activity, and potentially under eating. And so if you are tracking your basal body temperature, or maybe you think you might want to start, just pay attention to the number that you're seeing, and you really shouldn't be dipping below 97 degrees on a regular basis. And ideally, you'd want to see that closer to the 97.5 Fahrenheit if possible. Okay. The next sign that you're under eating is hair loss. Now, again, hair loss is a common symptom of hypothyroidism. So the truth is a lot of these symptoms can be associated with hypothyroidism, and it's not really a surprise because chronic undereating can create hypothyroidism. So a lot of times these early warning signs, they can be related to low thyroid hormone, but that low thyroid hormone could simply be related to an inadequate food intake. So again, if you have hypothyroidism or if you're familiar with the symptoms of hypothyroidism, these all make sense that they could be either or. Hypothyroidism or undereating or both. And so that's why I just want to make sure you're getting appropriate care and testing if you do feel like you're eating enough, but you're still experiencing these symptoms. So hair loss can be a symptom of undereating for a variety of reasons. It can be caused by low protein intake because our hair shaft is made of protein. And if we don't eat enough protein in our diets, or if we're burning through a bunch of protein stores to create glucose through gluconeogenesis, that is something that's going to affect the growth of our hair. And so if you're losing a lot of hair, or your hair grows really slow, or you just feel like it's thinner than it used to be, that can be a sign of undereating, either in total calories or protein. And as I mentioned a little while ago, low protein intake is very common on plant-based diets. It's not as common on things like paleo, keto, because those diets do really emphasize protein as a big part of the food that you'd be eating. Doesn't mean it's impossible, it's just less likely. Whereas a plant-based diet, you have to be really, really cautious about how much protein that you're getting and be paying attention to it. And it's not uncommon for vegans and vegetarians to be eating inadequate protein if they're not paying attention. Another thing that can cause hair loss is micronutrient deficiencies, especially B vitamins, minerals, fat-soluble vitamins, really everything that we're getting from our food. If you're not eating enough on a day-to-day basis, you are much higher risk of developing these micronutrient deficiencies than if you are getting enough total food. And that's just because if you think about it, a low food intake is just going to reduce your micronutrient intake across the board. And our bodies really do have a very high need for vitamins and minerals. And we live in a day and age where food is not as nutrient dense as it used to be. A lot of times we're eating more processed food than we used to. And it's just harder for us to get these vitamins and minerals from our diet. And so if you're under eating, you're putting yourself at even more of a deficit of these nutrients. And there are a lot of different nutrient deficiencies that can lead to hair loss. Not going to go through all of them because, again, that could be its own podcast, but iron's a great example of one that if you're iron deficient, that can lead to hair loss. And iron deficiency can happen on any diet, but especially on restricted diets, especially plant-based diets. And just if you're not eating a lot of red meat or you're not eating organ meats like liver, it can be very easy to become iron deficient. Another thing that can create hair loss is hormonal dysregulation. I mentioned hypothyroidism, but also low sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone can affect the health and just ability of our hair to grow. And so even if you don't have hypothyroidism, if you're under eating, you will be prone to having low levels of sex hormones as well. And those low sex hormones can lead to hair loss in addition to the low thyroid hormone. So hair loss, if you're noticing that, is definitely something that can be a sign of malnutrition. And you definitely want to get that checked out from a registered dietitian or other healthcare provider that can help assess your diet to make sure that you are getting adequate, not only calories, but also micronutrients. Number 5 on my list of 12 signs that you're under eating is mood swings. And mood swings can be as simple as being hangry. I know most of us are familiar with that term where you get so hungry that you get very irritable and moody. That's more of an immediate sign of under eating. And sometimes it's hard to notice. A lot of times we're not really aware that we're experiencing that until somebody else mentions it, someone who is the recipient of that hanger and is, just giving us attention to the fact that our mood is not normal. So yeah, it can be something as simple as that initial mood swing when your blood sugar is low, but it can also be more problematic when it comes to things like anxiety and depression, which that is something that, of course, you want to be working with a doctor on if you've been diagnosed with anxiety or depression, but it is something to be aware of that anxiety and depression and undereating can be a cycle just the way that constipation and undereating can be. And the reason for that is because a lot of times anxiety and depression will affect appetite. It affects our neurotransmitter function, which can affect the way our brain communicates with the rest of our body. And a lot of times the medication that's provided for either of those conditions can be something that affects appetite. It can either make us way more hungry than usual, or it can actually suppress appetite. So again, you can develop anxiety and depression from malnutrition caused by chronic undereating. And having anxiety and depression can be something that then creates an undereating situation because of the effect on our appetite. So you just want to be really cautious if you're experiencing mood dysregulation, mood swings. If you've been diagnosed with anxiety and depression, you want to check in on your diet to see, are you getting enough calories and how is your micronutrient intake looking, your vitamins and minerals, and even your macronutrient intake, since the health of our brain is very affected by the carbs and fat that we eat. Especially protein does affect our brain since neurotransmitters are produced from protein. So you want to make sure that your protein intake is adequate and diverse as well. But a lot of times the quality and amount of the fat and carbs that you're eating can greatly affect your brain health. And so if you're experiencing mood swings, mood dysregulation, working with a dietitian, finding out if your food intake could play a role at all is really important. Okay, sign number 6 is dizziness. Now, dizziness is something that I know I used to experience it a lot when I used to struggle with undereating, when I was on low carb diets all the time. A lot of times I was experiencing a lot of dizziness, and sometimes that's just in the form of feeling random bouts of dizziness. Other times, this is something that I used to experience, was I would experience tunnel vision after standing up. So basically, if you have that experience of getting up from a seat and all of a sudden your vision starts to go a little dark in the periphery and maybe you feel a little bit lightheaded, that can be a sign of undereating, typically due to either low blood pressure and or low blood sugar. And as I mentioned a little while ago, your adrenal glands really kick in with stress hormone release when you are experiencing low blood sugar to help bring that blood sugar up. Your adrenals also control your blood pressure. So when you have a low blood sugar episode, your blood pressure can also get affected by that. And the adrenal glands are going to be stressed by a low blood pressure or low blood sugar episode. And you can experience that sign or symptom of low blood pressure by experiencing dizziness, tunnel vision, lightheadedness, feeling like you need to sit down after you stand. Any of that can be a sign of just having that low blood sugar leading to low blood pressure, which then is triggered by undereating, either in total calories or in some people, it's really just that carb intake that is affecting their ability to have balanced blood sugar. Now, protein and fat also help balance your blood sugar. So I'm not saying that carbs are the only thing that you should look at when experiencing low blood sugar. And in fact, too many carbs or too much sugar as part of your diet can cause blood sugar dysregulation as well. And that's why when I work with clients, I really focus on balancing their macronutrients and making sure that they're not too high or too low in any one of those, because that's really what creates the best blood sugar control for most people. Now, sign number 7 is one that I work with all the time. And if you're familiar with my work or familiar with the programs that I offer, maybe you're even someone who's joined my Get Your Period Back program, this is one that I specialize in, and I help a lot of women overcome this. And that is irregular and or missing periods. So you don't have to have no period at all to be seeing some issues with your periods that can be caused by undereating. If you have cycles that go longer than 35 days on average, or you're having cycles that are occasionally in that 40, 50, 60 day range or longer, that is something that can be a sign of inadequate calorie intake, particularly because of your nutritional intake's effect on ovulation. So the long story short of this is that inadequate calorie intake tells your brain to shut down ovulation. This is a protective mechanism because pregnancy and child rearing is extremely energetically demanding. And if your brain thinks that you're in any sort of starvation state or food availability shortage, it's going to shut down ovulation as a way to protect you and to protect any sort of child that would be born out of that low calorie availability state. So it's a survival mechanism. It's actually what your body's designed to do, but it's something that can obviously create a lot of problems in the long term if you are chronically not ovulating and eventually not menstruating because of that. Undereating is the most common cause of secondary hypothalamic amenorrhea. And secondary hypothalamic amenorrhea just means that you were menstruating at one point and then eventually you weren't. And you have to miss 3 months of a period to be diagnosed with hypothalamic amenorrhea. But even if you're seeing those longer cycles, that can be an indication of undereating. And so if you're not having a regular period, one of the first things I suggest is looking at your total calorie intake and making sure that it is enough to meet your needs and possibly even a little extra compared to what you think your needs are to help really tell your brain that calories are available and that ovulation is safe. This is one of the major components of my Get Your Period Back program. And so it's something that is the first thing I take my clients through in that program, ensuring that they're eating enough, making sure that they know how to build a meal template that provides enough calories, and also making sure they're not avoiding any single macronutrient for whatever reason, whether that's because they follow a restricted diet or they just didn't even realize that they were undereating on carbs or fat or protein. Number 8 on this list of 12 signs that you're undereating is poor stress tolerance. This is kind of similar to the mood swings topic, but I look at poor stress tolerance as being a little bit different than mood swings. If you've ever had a situation where there was a lot of different stress happening in your life and you felt like you just weren't handling it very well, this is a sign of poor stress tolerance. The truth is that being underfed chronically keeps your nervous system in a fight or flight mode. And so essentially your body's going to think anything that's a threat is much larger of a threat than it actually is. And it's going to have that heightened stress response, even in the face of simple daily stressors. So if you find that you're somebody who flies off the handle when something happens that's stressful, or you just feel super overwhelmed when you experience stress, or you just feel paralyzed in the face of challenges, that can be a sign of poor stress tolerance. And again, undereating is something that can trigger that or at least contribute to it. The 9th sign that you're undereating is headaches. And there's a couple different reasons why headaches might happen from inadequate food intake. One of those is just from low blood sugar. Our brains are fueled by glucose primarily. And even if you're eating a keto diet, your brain is still using glucose. So if you have low blood sugar, that's going to be something that can create cognitive issues, including a headache. And again, this is really easy to test. If you're having a headache, if you eat something that is a balanced protein, carb, and fat meal or snack, if that headache goes away, that's a pretty quick indicator that undereating was what was the trigger of that headache. Now, it's not just about low blood sugar when it comes to headaches and how they're impacted by undereating. Low hormonal levels, particularly estrogen, but also low progesterone, can be something that creates headaches and especially migraines. And these migraines can often be cyclical. I work with a lot of women that experience premenstrual migraines, whether that's a couple days before their period or when they get their period. They experience bad headaches and even migraine level headaches on a regular basis. And that is a sign often of low estrogen, and sometimes low progesterone, could be low both. Undereating is something that is very commonly a contributor to low levels of hormones. We talked a few minutes ago about irregular missing periods and how the brain shuts down ovulation when you're undereating. If you're not ovulating, you're definitely not producing progesterone. And if you're undereating, a lot of times you're not going to be producing as much estrogen as well. And you're not going to be having appropriate estrogen cycling because of the lack of ovulation. So this is something that you're not going to notice immediately from eating a balanced snack or meal. And so that's why I don't want to use that as the only indicator that your headache is driven by undereating. But like I said, if you're chronically undereating, you can develop these low hormone levels, and these low hormones can then lead to cyclical, regular headaches and migraines. Sign number 10 that you might be undereating is poor sports performance. If you're someone who's very active, whether that's doing something like CrossFit or running or Orange Theory or whatever kind of workout that you're doing regularly, if you find that either you're not seeing improvement in your performance over time, as an example, if you're a weightlifter, either CrossFit or powerlifting or Olympic lifting, anything like that, if you're not seeing progress in how much weight you can lift after several weeks of training consistently, that is a very common sign of undereating. I've actually worked with clients before who had been stuck in a strength gain plateau for months, and they were getting really frustrated because they're going to the gym 3-4 times a week, trying to build muscle, trying to get stronger, and they're not seeing any progress there until we look at their diet and see that they're undereating for the amount of activity that they're doing. They start eating enough, and I've literally seen people double their weights that they were able to do for things like the bench press or deadlifting or something that takes an entire body compound movement to perform. And so that's a really, really easy sign that you're not eating enough if you are strength training on a regular basis and not seeing performance improvements. It's not just about not seeing improvements, though. If you feel like you are feeling really exhausted or worn out after a training session, or you can't make it through the full routine without getting exhausted or feeling like you can't do the movement because your muscles are just giving out, that can be a very common sign of undereating as well, because your body needs those calories, needs that glucose to fuel the workout. It needs that protein to repair your muscles after a lifting session so that your muscles can actually get stronger. You know, if you're constantly running on gluconeogenesis to produce glucose, you're using muscle tissue for that protein supply to create that glucose. So you're fighting muscle development with gluconeogenesis all the time, and you're basically breaking your muscle tissues down and not rebuilding them in that circumstance. So again, if you're an active person and you are tracking your performance or paying attention to your performance in any way, shape, or form, and you're noticing that it's not improving or it's actually getting worse, that's a really, really good sign that undereating is part of the problem. Number 11 on my list of 12 signs that you're undereating is brain fog. And I mentioned a couple minutes ago that your brain runs primarily on glucose as its preferred fuel source, even if you're on a low carb diet. Again, you could be on a keto diet and running most of your body primarily on ketones, but your brain is still running on glucose. So if you have low blood sugar, it makes sense that you would experience brain fog or a lack of concentration because your brain literally doesn't have enough fuel to function. And the interesting thing that a lot of people don't realize is when you're doing more thinking or doing an activity that requires a lot of brain power, you're actually going to burn way more glucose than if you're doing something relatively mindless, like, you know, if you're just taking a walk and just enjoying yourself, not really thinking about anything, or if you're laying on the couch watching TV and it's just kind of like, you know, zoning out a little bit. That is going to be a low glucose demanding state. Still glucose demanding. You're still using glucose during that time, but compare that to being at work or, you know, being in school and taking a test, or if you're like me, being an online entrepreneur and planning out content and strategy, that kind of thing. All of that burns way more glucose than what your body or what your brain would be using if you weren't using your intellect as much as you might be in whatever stage of life you're in. So it's something to be aware of if you're someone who has a job or a life circumstance that requires a lot of thinking and a lot of cognitive functioning and focus and deep analysis work, that kind of stuff. You really, really need to make sure that you're eating enough and especially enough carbs to supply the glucose that you need for your brain to function normally and really function at its best. The 12th of 12 signs that you're under eating is one that I see all the time. And it's one that really surprises people. I don't know why. I feel like at this point I've mentioned it so many times. I would hope that people would be aware of it, but it really is kind of wild how often I talk to people that have no idea that this is a sign of under eating. But this is the sign of sleep disturbances and or insomnia. Now, the reason why sleep disturbances are created from under eating is primarily due to blood sugar control. Our stress hormones spike when our blood sugar drops, and we're really not supposed to be having a spike in stress hormones overnight. In fact, really the main time we're supposed to have a spike in cortisol is as soon as we wake up in the morning. That is hypothetically supposed to be our peak. Obviously, we're going to have some spikes if we're dealing with actual stress, but in a perfect world, if we're not having any stress at all, our cortisol should be at its highest point within 30 minutes after we wake up. So if you're having a spike in cortisol overnight when you're supposed to be asleep, this can actually wake you up. And so it's not only waking you up, but it's also waking up other organs that really are supposed to be in their nighttime mode. And one of those organs that is supposed to be in nighttime mode is your bladder. Your bladder is really supposed to be, I don't want to say asleep. I feel like that's a little bit of an oversimplification, but your bladder should really be pretty inactive throughout the night. When you have a cortisol spike overnight, that cortisol spike actually activates your bladder and makes your bladder function the way that it would be functioning during the day. Add to that the fact that your blood sugar dropping overnight ramps up adrenal activity, which then affects fluid balance because of how the adrenals control fluid balance, blood pressure, that kind of thing. You end up filling your bladder with more urine because your body's trying to manage fluid balance and make sure that your minerals are in balance with the water in your body. So it's trying to get rid of that extra water through your kidneys and then into your bladder. So combine that with the fact that your bladder, even though it's supposed to be asleep, is now awake, that's going to create that need to urinate overnight. So having to go to the bathroom overnight, even once, can be a sign that you're under eating. I find that the healthiest people that I interact with, work with, or even when I think about my own life, when I'm eating appropriately and keeping my stress levels low and getting to bed on time, you should be sleeping through the night. And I definitely find that I sleep through the night without having to pee. Even though I drink a decent amount of water during the day, my bladder is asleep and my stress hormones are not spiking, and I don't have that fluid imbalance that then fills up my bladder. So that is actually a sign of good health, to not have to go to the bathroom overnight. If you're finding yourself getting up to pee multiple times during the night, then this is, I would say, the number one thing you need to be focused on is your total calorie intake. And again, I know sometimes it can seem a little bit weird. A lot of times people think that they're peeing too much because they're drinking too much water. So they end up like trying to avoid water right before bed. But the fact is that your food intake and your blood sugar balance is going to make a much bigger impact on your body's desire to urinate overnight than having water right before going to bed. I really feel like if you're healthy and your blood sugar is stable and you're eating enough and you're keeping your stress levels low, that you should be able to drink some water before going to bed and not have to pee overnight. Now, if you have like 32 ounces of a water bottle right before bed, there's limits to that, right? But you should be able to get up and pee and go right back to sleep without it being an issue if that's the case. I don't suggest getting a ton of fluid right before bed, since obviously getting woken up in the middle of the night is not ideal if you can avoid it. But it is something that, again, having water before you go to bed shouldn't be something that triggers overnight urination unless you're also experiencing fluid imbalance and low blood sugar because of the inadequate calorie intake, or maybe even inadequate carb or protein or fat intake during the day. All right. So those are the 12 most common signs of symptoms of undereating. I'll just review them really quick so you can remember and just check them off your own mental checklist and know, is this something I need to be paying attention to? Number 1 is fatigue. Number 2 is constipation. Number 3 is feeling cold or having cold hands and feet. Number 4 is hair loss. Number 5 is mood swings or being hangry. Number 6 is dizziness or tunnel vision. Number 7 is irregular or missing periods. Number 8 is poor stress tolerance. Number 9 is headaches. Number 10 is poor sports performance. Number 11 is brain fog. And number 12 is sleep disturbances or insomnia. All right, so now I want to hear from you. Are you finding yourself checking off more than one of the items on this list? Let me know in the comments below the main page for this podcast episode. If you were somebody who used to feel this way and found that eating more resolved these symptoms, definitely let us know as well, because I think it's always great to have anecdotal data to support how effective eating enough can be when it comes to eliminating a lot of these symptoms. And just let me know, did you resonate with this episode? Is this something that you're going to experiment with eating more to see if it's helpful? I do know that eating more can sound very vague, and it is something that has to be personalized to the individual. If this is something that you want help with, I do currently have spaces for private clients to work with me on this exact issue. I work with a lot of women and some men on helping them make sure that they are eating enough, that their macronutrients are balanced, that their micronutrient intake is appropriate, and that they're just treating their bodies in a way that allows them to function at their best, have good energy, sleep well, be able to exercise and tolerate more intense exercise that allows them to build strength and endurance, and just have really clear brain function, stable mood. All of the things that make us feel amazing on a day-to-day basis can be directly influenced by the total food that we eat on a day-to-day basis, the types of food, and how well nourished our body is. So like I said, if you need help with this, check out the links below this podcast episode on my website to learn more about how you can work with me. You can also go to my website, lauraschoenfeldrd.com, and go to the Work With Me tab to find out how I work with my clients and to apply if you're interested. I just want to make sure that you're getting support with this because, again, it's shocking to me how many people are struggling with this, especially people who are educated about nutrition. And it's so common in so many of the ancestral health, paleo type of nutrition worlds that I am more associated with and more connected to. And it's not something that you just have to put up with. It's not something that's normal. It's not a sign of aging. It's something that you really want to make sure that you are taking appropriate care of your body, supporting your hormone health, supporting your brain health, and just doing all the things that allow you to feel your best on a day-to-day basis. So that's it for today. I hope that this episode was helpful. If you're enjoying the podcast, please subscribe. Go to iTunes. You can subscribe to the podcast so that way you never miss an episode. And if you're enjoying the podcast, I would so appreciate if you were willing to leave a positive review for the show. Reviews from listeners like you are so important for helping other people find the podcast so that they can learn this really important information for themselves as well. So if you're willing to share a review, and especially if it's a positive review, I would be so appreciative of that. It really means the world to me, not only that you're spending this time with me on a regular basis, but also that you're putting the time in to recommend the show to others so that way the message can be spread and more people can get helped. All right. Well, it's been awesome hanging out with you this week. Like I said, if you had any aha moments or you've been under eating in the past and you found that eating more helped some of the symptoms you're experiencing, I want to hear from you. So share a comment below the post on my website or come over on Instagram and share a comment on the Instagram post. I just love hearing from you and I can't wait to hear what you thought about this episode. All right. Well, it's been so great hanging out with you today, and I can't wait to see you here on the Fed and Fearless podcast next week. Take care, everybody. Hey, everyone. Laura Schoenfeld here again. Are you one of the nearly 45% of female athletes who experience menstrual irregularity? Have you gone more than 3 months in a row without a period? If so, keep listening because I have a special training just for you. As a women's health expert and functional medicine dietitian, I've successfully helped hundreds of women recover their periods quickly with my evidence-based holistic approach, whether they had hypothalamic amenorrhea, polycystic ovarian syndrome or PCOS, or post-birth control syndrome. Seeing these women recover their hormonal health, get their period back, and even get pregnant was truly a joy. And I knew I just had to get this information out to as many women as I could. And I can't wait to share this truly life-changing information with you too. That's why I'm excited to share with you my free online video training, How to Get a Regular Period Without Birth Control. On this free training, you'll learn why any woman who wants to get her period back and get pregnant should not take the birth control pill. The single most important thing women must know about following the right diet if they want to get their period back and prepare for a healthy pregnancy. Why quitting exercise isn't necessary for period recovery, but you do have to have the right approach to working out. Why chasing weight gain or even weight loss is a total waste of time when trying to recover a normal menstrual cycle. You'll also learn 5 common myths preventing so many women from getting their period back so they can get pregnant naturally. And even their doctors are confused about these 5 myths. I'll also show you how to save time and money on your journey to becoming a mom and starting a family. And finally, you'll learn my proven 4-step protocol that has helped dozens of women get their periods back so they can get pregnant fast and without using risky medications. So if you want to get your period back quickly without resorting to birth control, quitting exercise, or giving up the healthy lifestyle that you love, then this free online workshop is for you. To get instant access to the free training, go to getyourperiodback.com. You'll learn everything you need to know about recovering a regular, healthy period without giving up the healthy foods and exercise that you love. Check it out at getyourperiodback.com, and I'll see you on the training.